That's a creaking door. Well, you knew that. But it's not just any creaking door. It's the opening of one of Himan Brown's most iconic radio programs, Inner Sanctum Mysteries. And this is Audio Maverick, a celebration of Brown's life and work.
Come in.
Oh, very cool.
We've already met many versions of Himan Brown in the course of this series. The second generation Drew from Brownsville.
I spoke only Yiddish.
The aspiring performer.
I was not afraid of audiences.
The even more aspiring producer. The golden age success story.
I'd like to feel that we were pioneering.
But we haven't yet touched on Brown's artistry.
Sound, to me, is such a necessary part of radio drama.
I'm Margot Avery. Stay tuned. The 1930s and 40s were radio's golden age, when Brown flourished as a packager and producer. A lot of radio shows at the time were pretty formulaic.
In those days, we didn't break things up. So you had a signature front and back.
The Columbia Broadcasting System presents the new comedy,
My Friend Irma.
The signatures were usually musical.
starring Marie Wilson as Irma and Kathy Lewis as Jane, with John Brown as Anne.
Today, most producers and creators have access to massive sound libraries where they can find music from all genres that can be downloaded at the click of a mouse. But Brown had a different resource, one that today seems like an incredible luxury.
In those days, every network had its house orchestra. NBC had a staff of 70, 80 men.
The NBC Symphony Orchestra, as it was called, was under the direction of the legendary Arturo Toscanini.
And the men were on a weekly wage, so they'd give you 10 or 20 of the men from the orchestra to do something special for you. And you could hire someone to write scores and do things.
Most of them were these generic orchestra swells. But he got bored with that, even though he could get customized music, and that's where his inventive signatures come in. Brown was ahead of his time in using solo musicians to create these signature openers and closers. For example, there was David Harum, a show about a folksy American banker.
We bring you the story that has thrilled America for generations. The true-to-life story of David Harum, the kindly little country philosopher who makes life worth living by helping those who need help and by outwitting those who are too clever and scheming in helping themselves.
So I thought, how nice if I had a voice, a clear, good country voice with a guitar. That would do for me.
The man he hired was Tex Ritter, a country music pioneer. Brown was very hands-on, often finding promising soloists to set the scenes of his shows. His first serial, Marie the Little French Princess, featured an accordion. And Joyce Jordan, his drama about a woman intern, glided into its opening with a harp, an effect that he was pleased with.
The harp, the glissandos of the harp were very, very effective.
Brown doesn't comment on it, but it's a soft opening to a show in which a woman struggles for a place in a man's world. It may have been a way to invite a traditional audience in before introducing the show's still daring premise. But even though Brown had some creative control, he wanted to push past dependency on music, even material he commissioned, to shape the character of a piece.
And this is why I became such a devoted creator of sounds. I believed in sounds.
And he really meant sounds. Each of his iconic programs had what he called a sound signature that reflected the identity of the show. Dick Tracy in Hot Pursuit.
Stand by. Dick Tracy is on the air.
The Saint, an elusive wraith-like character on little cat feet that lead us into the plot. And Brown completely repurposed one of old-time radio's workhorses. The Hammond organ. Inventor Lawrence Hammond had succeeded in reproducing the sound of the vast traditional pipe organ electronically, filing his first patent in 1934. His instrument was small, with a keyboard that was easy to play, and it quickly became popular at public events and private performances. And an early black radio host, the Reverend Cobbs, introduced the instrument to broadcast. Its wheezy, ghostly sound was put into the service of every type of drama to signal an emotional crux, a revelation, a thrilling plot device. To Brown, this constant use of the Hammond in the era's musical scores felt overdone. He discovered another potential use for this bonsai version of an organ: metaphorical sound effects.
I felt that the Hammond organ was banal to me. It was really a sound effect, and I proved that when I did my Inner Sanctum Mysteries.
This Thrills and Chills show, which debuted in 1941, gave Brown plenty of opportunities to experiment.
I used the Hammond as an adjunct to sound, so that when the gunshot went off, the Hammond imitated the gun. The scream, the Hammond imitated the scream. And I used it for the effect of wind or to stalk a killer and things like that.
You gotta love the offhand stalk a killer and things like that. Brown was completely ruthless in the service of a good story. It was a kind of in-the-moment composition. Today, when you listen to a podcast and hear music or sound effects, all of that was usually added after the recording, sourced from digital libraries. A handful of contemporary producers record on location the way one would for a film. That wasn't the case in the 1930s. Radio in the golden age was live. Any sounds the audience heard were created at the same time the actors were performing their scenes.
Sound effects in the 30s were all manual and all done by a sound effects man. You had recordings, acetate recordings, that on them had automobiles and trains and all the airplanes of the time and so on. But everything else was pretty much done by hand. Doors were opened and closed, phone bells, which I still do by hand.
But Brown's second creative era was quite different. By the time he resurrected suspense drama with CBS Radio Mystery Theater in 1974, his productions were hybrids. They were fully recorded in one session, with the effects rolled in simultaneously.
And don't you ever come back.
The method is called live to tape. But then they were massaged for broadcast, which might mean redoing an effect that didn't work well the first time, or sweetening the mix with some additional sounds.
Howard.
Oh, it's you, Mimi, waiting for me in all this wind and rain.
With the advent of the cassette tape in 1963, Brown was able to produce some of these sound effects beforehand, which enabled him to plug and play, and to preserve live action sequences for later use. For example,
So the car is driving along and goes into a skid and hits the side of the railing and tumbles over and then crashes and bursts into flame. I needed 3 sound effects men to do that.
in his 1974 interview with the Directors Guild of America, Brown reflects on how these innovations changed his process.
Today, my sound man builds this up in an hour the day before.
Actually, he had 3 sound effects guys during the run of CBS Radio Mystery Theater, but at different times. They were Jimmy Dwan, Jerry McCarthy, and Peter Prescott. But Brown still remembered with respect the cadre of pros he would have worked with in the past.
In the 30s and 40s, the sound effect man was an elitist. It was a very special world.
And still is. When Brown spoke with the Directors Guild, he told the interviewer that live sound effects construction was a lost art. But as with vinyl records and turntables, this practice resurfaced.
I often feel like I know the script as well as the director does. I know where all the beats are. I know where everything happens.
Tony Brewer has been working as a live sound effects designer in radio and audio drama since the 1980s. He got his start with Otherworld Media, the producers of the documentary Empire of the Air, which helped us to understand the early history of radio in Episode 1. And now, Brewer tells us what live sound effects bring to a performance. During the performance of a play, he's behind a table with all his sonic props laid out.
For me, working live, everything kind of has to be at arm's reach. So, I like to keep things in close on the table and everything is right behind me. That's more of a performance thing. So I'm not walking across the stage to go get something. Everything is very close and right around me.
What he especially likes is the challenge of working in real time.
You have to hit your mark and you have to hit it consistently every time. I'm fortunate that some of the shows I've worked on, I think the vast majority of them have been just a one and done. You rehearse, and maybe you get a couple of rehearsals. You do the table read and then a couple of run-throughs, and then you do it once live, and maybe there's a recording, and that's it.
City folks have Uber, but the drivers out there can't find any place here in the country, so we've got Goober. Just go ahead and dial it up.
Brewer says the creative team on a show is often looking for a blend of the real and the imagined.
And here's your ride.
That looks like a 1956 farm mall tractor.
Most often they want something that sounds bigger, that sounds more, something that's hyper-real, something that doesn't sound realistic. They don't want an actual object. They want something that sounds like the real object plus some sort of intangible quality that makes it sound even more like itself.
Himan Brown's creaking door is the quintessential example. He used it as the opener for Inner Sanctum Mysteries, and in fact first pitched the show with that title, until his buyer said it lacked class. And then when Brown returned to broadcast radio with CBS Radio Mystery Theater, there it was again. That door was Brown's portal into the strange and phantasmagoric.
Come in.
But he also used sound to signify characters.
How do you say fat man? I didn't want to say it musically. I wanted to say it with a sound. Well, to me, finally, the most expressive sound of a fat man is a fat man's laugh. Because his laughter, which comes right from his belly with the shaking and the shaking of the folds of flesh, really set the scene for what was to come.
This is such a great example of Brown himself embodying the character he has conceived. Places were also treated like characters. In episode 5, we heard the powerful opening to Brown's Grand Central Station. Worth repeating. For the gentleman detective Bulldog Drummond, a British import.
Bulldog Drummond, what did I need? I needed London. What is London? London is the foghorns and Big Ben and so on.
Out of the fog, out of the night, and into his American adventures comes Bulldog Drummond.
And of course, sound conveys action as well as atmosphere. Here's a chase scene from an episode of Bulldog Drummond.
Come on. This way to the stairs.
You can probably hear that the footsteps have been created in a studio. They don't sound live.
We're up at the top of the building. Which way now? I don't know.
And fight scenes? So plentiful in Golden Age crime shows? Tony Brewer says they were usually a composite.
The actors definitely work with the Foley artist. The Foley artist is punching themselves to make the hits, but the actors are the ones doing the grunting and that sort of thing.
Sound effects, used to refer to sounds created physically for radio broadcast. Foley, named for sound designer Tom Foley, was the same practice for film. Now they are often used interchangeably. In the 1980s, when Brown was producing CBS Radio Mystery Theater, lightweight portable recording equipment created new opportunities. Brown was excited by the ability to go into the field.
To go out and record the sounds of nature, the sounds of birds.
You may find my little family have some peculiar beliefs, habits, quirks, things that appear different to you.
Portable recording equipment had actually been around in some form since the 1920s, but didn't come into general use until the 1980s. Much as Brown respected live sound effects artists and their repertoire of synthetic effects, he was happy to move into a new era of production where he wasn't dependent on them.
I didn't need a man called Brad Barker, strangely enough, to make me dog sounds. And the technical end of our business became more sophisticated. Everything else began to fit in.
Brown could be a bit elliptical in his recollections, but here he seems to be commenting on the fact that a sound effects man, almost always a man, had to be a kind of actor, creating scenes with objects. But soon the real world became more and more the source of sounds.
Here's the gate.
What a view. The channel's very calm today, isn't it?
Uncommonly so. Gwen? Gwendolyn, come and meet a top-notch feature writer from the Times. That beautiful girl walking toward us, believe it or not, is from America.
And sometimes Brown went in search of them himself. Most publicity stills of Brown show a dapper man in front of a mic or directing a star in an obviously staged shot. But one picture from the archives shows him in a dinghy, in shirt sleeves, clearly conducting a scene from some play. Live sound effects, or Foley, helped create a listener's experience of people, places, and things in a radio narrative. But today, most audio programs are post-produced, meaning they are not live and are constructed after the actors have recorded their scenes. And so new terms have evolved to describe how these dramatic works are shaped and supported by sound. We hear the term sound design much more. And it means more than sound that supports action. Put down that gun. Or locates us in the narrative. I knew you would return to Chicago. It's what helps create the sonic identity of a show. It's not too much of a stretch to think of sound design as a form of semiotics, the study of sounds and symbols.
Come in.
Oh, very cool.
That's the start of our show. And if you've been keeping company with Audio Maverick, then you've been listening to the work of our wonderful sound designers and engineers.
I think that if I'm having fun doing the sound design, it's going to be fun for the listener.
That's John Delore.
The hope is that you really feel like you're immersed in a whole new world.
And that's Bart Warshaw. And as sound designers, they are often using the tools and sounds at their fingertips to transport audiences into different spaces. For example, they could put me in the middle of a dark forest in the middle of the night. And with just a little scoring can suggest that maybe I'm in danger. And just like that, I'm sitting by a peaceful river on a spring morning. But for this show, they're using their tools to repurpose the vocabulary of Golden Age radio to accentuate and pace our episodes.
In a series like Audio Maverick, we're telling the story of Himan Brown. And so part of what we're trying to do through sound design is bring the listener closer to the sound of radio at that time. And sometimes that's a scoring choice. And other times it's sort of using the old-time radio effects to give it that texture.
And what we're doing is a continuation of the pioneering work that Himan Brown was developing. We're trying to captivate audiences by taking them out of the studio and putting them into these new places, times, and worlds that we create for them.
So now you know our trade secrets, and that they connect us to the worlds of Himan Brown.
I think that listeners back then could hear that Himan Brown and his team were having fun doing what they were doing. So I think that is also connective tissue between what we're doing on this show and what he did. It's just fun.
This kind of thing is a lot of fun, but the real reason for doing it is to honor Himan Brown, creator of sounds, who was able to explore the medium and its possibilities in the two different eras of his producing life. How astonished he would be by today's rich universe of sounds and sources, by reels of tape and cassettes and cartridges replaced by algorithms and mouse clicks. But it wouldn't change anything about what he believed was the core of all successful audio production, the partnership with the listener.
Because it sets your imagination going. The better the sound, the more perfect the sound, the more ingenious the sound, the more I call upon you to develop it for yourself and become a part of everything that I'm projecting.
Next up, a new era for Himan Brown. Join us for Episode 7, The Golden Torch Keeps Burning, where we'll hear about his creative work as script editor, director, and producer. I'm Margot Avery. Stay tuned. Audio Maverick is produced and directed by Sarah Montague, who also writes the scripts. Our executive producers are Melina Brown and Sarah Montague. CUNY TV's executive director is Chiqui Cartagena. The director of production is Susan Iger, and Deborah Labadie is CUNY TV's chief operating officer. The associate producer for Audio Maverick is Corinne Wallace, and our audio production intern is Lucia Funaro. Audio Maverick is narrated by Margot Avery. Our technical team at CUNY includes senior audio engineer Richard Kim and audio engineer and program mix engineer Lisa Goslin. Our staff photographer is Laura Fuchs. Our archivists are David Rice and Katrina Schlosser. Our closed caption coordinator is Amy Monty. And the script editor is Allison Berenger. Our theme was composed by Allison Leighton Brown. Sound design and final mixing are by John Delore and Bart Warshaw. Multitude Productions handles our publicity and marketing. Excerpts from the Himan Brown Oral History, courtesy of the Directors Guild of America, Inc., www.dga.org. All rights reserved. Audio Maverick is a production of CUNY TV.